to the second episode of Dylan's Economics. Today we're mainly going to be talking about politics. And I know politics, everyone's talking about politics, but mainly today I want to talk about how it's going to affect you, how it is affecting you, how it's going to affect you in the near future, and mainly what you need to do about it. Now today we're going to be mainly focusing on introduction to politics, and then later on in the video we're going to be broaching how it affects the economy, stuff like that. I'll put chapters in, so anywhere you want to go, you can do. Starting off, this is mainly for British politics. We will broach slightly on American and slight examples from Germany and stuff like that, but it's mainly British politics currently. So you have three main parties in Britain as of currently. It's mainly been two main parties for the last good 100 years. It's been Labour and Conservative. Now Labour are mainly designed as the working man's party. They have the working man in mind. It's mainly just labourers, stuff like that, construction workers. That was the main premise of the Labour Party. As of right now, they're not doing a great job of it, as many people have seen, but we'll broach on that later. Now, the Conservatives, they're mainly nationalists, for those who did Brexit and stuff like that. They're mainly scoped around the rich right now, the elite and stuff like that. There's lots of lobbying going on, but that's by the by. You have the Conservatives as well, who, under Rishi Sunak, didn't do a great job, and so we voted them out. Now, the third wildcard that's recently reared its head is Reform. Now, Reform is led by Nigel Farage. He's the big spokesperson for everything, and people like Nigel Farage, but that's by the by. We'll broach a lot more on Reform later because it is really important right now anyway. But all you need to know for right now is it is the wildcard, and it's what most people are aiming to put their vote for in the next election in around 4.5 years. So today, I don't want to talk massively about the stuff we already know. We know there's massive lobbying going on, that's global, it's not fair basically. And we also know that there's a distinct lack, especially in the Labour Party, of interests of the working class person, of the middle class person. As we've seen Keir Starmer come in, we've seen a lot of, if anyone's been paying attention, we've seen them shifting a lot more to conservative views, as well as reform views, as we've seen recently with Keir Starmer saying stuff about the people on boats and stuff like that, as well as winter fuel cuts for people, which he's now walked back, but he's set in motion winter fuel cuts, seeming more like a conservative move than anything else, because Labour hasn't really taxed the working man much. They've attempted to help the working man out, but as we're seeing Labour come in now, this Labour season, we're seeing their interests kind of aligning. Now, what this is doing is, rightfully, it's peeing a lot of people off. I'm also peed off. Everyone's peed off. So what it's done is it's kind of caused a shift. At certain points in history, you will have seen, like in Nazi Germany, in 1918, stuff like that, you see people wanting change. Especially, 1918 in Russia and stuff like that. People want change, so they look to the next available option. Now, as of currently, the next available option, that's not Labour, is the Conservatives. However, we've just had 4 years of Conservative rule with Liz Truss and Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak and all that. And it's not gone great. It's not gone well for basically anyone. No one's really benefited apart from the elite as usual, but people really don't want Conservatives. So they're looking for a third option. And a massively popular one right now is Reform led by Nigel Farage. Now, Reform, as I said previously, is a massively dicey subject. They have many people thinking they're the best option for the country. And this is mainly due to propaganda. Now, I say that like propaganda is a massive thing. I'm not talking like Nazi Germany propaganda. I'm just talking over the last decade or so, especially under the Conservatives, we've seen massive anti-immigrant consensus, basically. Massive anti-immigrant thoughts, massive anti-immigrant behaviour. And from Brexit, we've seen a massive decline of quality of life. What Brexit aimed to do, and what the point of Brexit really was to nationalise Britain. It was to keep everything within government. It was to basically further Britain's understanding without having to help the EU, basically. We wanted our own thing. We thought, big global power, we should have our own stuff. That's great. However, through Brexit, we've made it incredibly difficult to legally immigrate into the country. as you would have seen with Anastasia, who we had on the show last week, or many of my other friends who have immigrated from different countries to come to Britain legally. It is incredibly difficult to gain citizenship. It is horrific trying to come here legally. And what that difficulty in legally immigrating has caused is a lot of people coming in on boats and stuff like that. A lot of people being shuttled onto unsafe, unfair travel that loses a lot of lives and is massively expensive, not only to them, but to us. Harbouring these people from boats is massively damaging. I'm agreeing with reform there. The boats should stop. However, there is a massive overblowing in the amount of people that the boats are actually bringing. There's a good 1% of the country of refugees, which is what Nigel Farage is campaigning against. Nigel Farage is using fake statistics and fake numbers to make you believe we're being invaded by immigrants. And that is simply not true. What Conservatives and Nigel Farage now have been trying to do is make legal immigration incredibly hard so they can scapegoat illegal immigration and say, this is the problem, this is why the economy's failing, this is why all this has happened. I'm here to tell you that is a complete and utter lie. The reason that you are getting poorer, the reason everyone's getting poorer, is because we are selling all of our things to foreign investors, then having to buy it back with loans, then paying off said loans to them, and then you buy more loans to loan again, and it's just a complete cycle. Now, why they're doing this is they don't really have a choice. Governments are immensely poor. As I'm sure I've said before, if you've seen any of the other videos, governments are massively in debt. You can look basically anywhere, any statistics, governments have no money. And then you think, but we pay lots of tax, where does the tax go? And what it's supposed to do is only pay for stuff like roads, schools, stuff like that, salaries and stuff like that for government workers. What it's now doing is a massive portion of it is being given to foreign investors. Because when we came upon tough times, especially after the end of World War II, we were massively poor. We started to sell off stuff like the railways, stuff like other government institutions that we owned. A massive portion of houses are sold to foreign investors, which is also doesn't help a housing crisis, but we'll get onto that in a separate video. What we started to do was sell off assets. And this is mainly coming into the Thatcher era, where the mines were closed and we sold off natural resources and railways and stuff like that. What now happens to our taxes is they go to paying off loans, because we need to keep the railways, we need to keep them operational, so we need to buy it off the rich contractors. But when we buy it off the rich contractors, we lose a lot of money, so we take out loans, almost definitely from the rich contractors. And this creates a cycle of trying to pay the loans back, not having enough because the interest is so high, then having to take it out of the tax budget. Now, this is why we're mainly seeing quality of life decrease and taxes increase, which never really has happened. When taxes increase, unless it's for something like a military operation or something like that, quality of life generally increases. However, right now, we're seeing quality of life massively spike down, especially for the working class, where lots of people are having to live on the street, especially in places like London and stuff like that. And we're seeing massive raises in taxes and public spending costs and stuff like that. Like I mentioned earlier, the winter fuel allowance, which has previously been walked back, but at the same time, that was an option. Instead of taxing the rich, which we will get onto, the current choice was to take winter fuel allowances to pay off these debts again. But this is the main reason why taxes are so expensive. Why all these governments seem to be doing nothing, because they really can't, if I'm honest. They need massive public opinion, and no one really knows what the issue is. So they look around, and they see, as the population rises, more immigrants, or more people of colour and stuff like that. The main reason this is people coming over legally and starting families, and then over generations, they branch out and stuff like that. That's just general population rise. That's not immigration crisis. That is a general population rise. What we're seeing right now, if you're seeing a lot more people and you think all these immigrants and stuff like that, these people have most likely lived here their whole lives. These people most likely were born and bred here and have lived here across generations. But what we're seeing from Nigel Farage and that is they're presenting a free option, an easy option: blame the immigrants. Because the last thing they want is people to turn around and think the rich may be the problem. Because if you've not noticed, Nigel Farage is a very rich man. The Conservatives have very rich men. Rishi Sunak is worth roughly £700 million. You get paid 150 grand a year to be a Prime Minister. Do you think he was in it for the money? Because I don't. I think he's got plenty of money, and I think he'd much rather keep it than give it to poor people. So we see Rishi Sunak with lots of money. We see Keir Starmer, supposedly a working man person from a working class background. He has an obscene amount of money, as do all the politicians, basically. And we see Nigel Farage, an ex-trader, an ex-banker, having an immense amount of money. So we have to look at the options that they're giving us, and we see they can either blame the immigrants, and they keep all their money, and they continue growing their money, or they pay higher taxes to the benefit of the poorer people that need it to survive, and social infrastructure and stuff like that. Why would you do that as a rich man? You gain nothing from doing that. You lose money. So what do? They do absolutely nothing. They blame it on the immigrants. We've seen this before in places like Nazi Germany. Not the exact same situation, but we see someone trying to gain power through scapegoating. I'm not saying Britain is like Nazi Germany, of course not, but the Jewish discrimination proposed by the Nazis was done to consolidate power, to keep power in. It was to use a scapegoat for all of the problems in the country currently, and it was to essentially draw attention away from the real issues, which in Germany at least were intense nationalism and war and stuff like that. In Britain, we're seeing those similar problems, not the same problems, but we're seeing similar problems of massive resource taking, massive lacks in social spending and stuff like that. And everyone's looking for an option to stop it, because everyone's sick and tired of these governments doing absolutely nothing. So they turn to the next available option, which is Nigel Farage and his reform manifesto and his reform goals to essentially take immigration out of the country. Now, this seems like a great idea: decrease the population of income of Britain, decrease the amount of people coming in every year. Unfortunately, that's not how the economy works. More people coming in actually boosts the economy. More people coming in means more spending, means more working. A good 99% of people coming in as refugees from actual war zones come in, start working, add to the economy. Now, these illegal migrants, I'm not as educated as I probably should be on that. There are a good few people who will sit there and just take benefits for like a good amount of time, as long as they can. But that's not an immigrant thing. That's a mindset thing. White British people do that all the time. There's several TV shows about white British people taking the piss with benefits, because everyone fucking does. I mean, there is much more incentive to take the piss and not work with benefits, but that's another sidetrack. Essentially, what we're saying, the good thing about immigrants is they come in, they spend money, and a good portion of refugees, especially refugees, but a good portion of immigrants, once they can move home, they do. I don't think you'd want to move to a foreign country and leave your home behind not by your own choice, because otherwise you'll die. I don't think you want to do that. I definitely don't want to do that. So then they spend their money here, and then they go home. We have no more people in than we did before, and a good amount of money has been injected into the economy. Unfortunately, when you do enter this country, it is very hard to start getting money, because to work you need to be a citizen. And to be a citizen, even from Ukraine, you come in from Ukraine at nearly the start of the war, you have to wait 1 or 2 months until you can work. That's 1 or 2 months where you just have to survive. You're not allowed to get benefits. You're not allowed to basically do anything. You just have to survive. And in this 1 or 2 months, it is immensely easy to get a mindset that the world is against you. This is what creates this perceived immigrant invasion that everyone's talking about. It is the constant downtrodden of people trying to come peacefully into this country, and we are constantly beating down on them that they shouldn't be here and they should go home. The reason that it's getting so bad is 1, rich get richer, 2, poor get poorer, and 3, when people try to get richer, we stamp them down and say shut up. That is the only thing we do. If you try and socially change in this country, you have to have a hell of a lucky time. If you're working class and you work in, say, a factory or stuff like that, or you did work in a factory, it is incredibly hard to get up to the middle class, especially now. In the times like the 60s, during the post-war consensus, which we'll get onto later, it was decently easy to get a good job and it'd pay you well and you'd be able to form a family and buy a house. Now you cannot do that. That is not possible. You go to somewhere like London, you're paying £2,000 a month to rent a room, and you're stuck. You can't really do anything. You're living paycheck to paycheck. And that's the experience of most people that don't have others to help them up, that don't have parents and grandparents to help them up. And it is a way that reform is counting on you, a way that reform is almost acting like a predator against you. It is constantly campaigning that all of these problems, all of these social injustices, all this stuff is caused by immigrants. And it's such a harmful message. The reason it's such a harmful message is it doesn't solve the problem. Now, the problem's getting really bad now. The problem's basically existed as long as we have. But around the 50s and 60s, the middle class emerged. There's never been a middle class before. There's been slight periods of time, like after the First World War in Germany and after the hyperinflation got sorted out there, they had a good period. But the middle class has never existed for this long, for this amount of time, as this stable as it is. It's never existed like this. And since then, since Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and stuff in America, they've been trying to drag it down slowly. They've been talking about the immigration crisis. They've been using them as a scapegoat for a century nearly. It is designed to avert your eyes from what's really happening. So you don't notice what's really happening and you don't care what's really happening, because people love being angry and people are really easy to make angry against a certain thing. Now, this may be immigrants, this may be Jews, this may be anything. People know how to make you angry, and it makes people really want to vote for stuff. The reason why politics are so important and so dangerous is we've let them, especially over the last 20 years, we've let Conservative and Labour waste time. Conservative and Labour and sat there, they've done basically nothing, slightly increasing minimum wage every now and again, and got done with it. They've been doing this in a circle for at least the last 2 decades. Around the year 2000, this started to rear its head. You can see around the year 2000, especially with Wall Street crash in 2008 and stuff, we are not financially secure. And that is becoming more and more true as we continue on, because all that ends up happening is these rich people who have politicians in their pocket, like Nigel Farage, like Rishi Sunak, keep buying stuff. Keep buying up stuff. Say you want to buy a house. If you don't get there, rich people will. Rich people will buy it. Because why wouldn't they? It's somewhere they can safely put their money that's resistant to inflation, and houses will always be a good purchase because everyone always needs a house. What this has caused is the housing prices that you see now. It's not immigrants constantly stealing houses. It's not the government constantly giving immigrants houses. It is the massive increase in house buying due to the rich running out of houses to buy, due to the rich running out of other things to buy. The rich have bought up all the land, they bought up all the houses, they bought up the seas if they can. They will buy everything until they cannot buy anything anymore, and then make stuff that they can buy again. It is, all they're doing is storing their wealth. And all this ends up doing is making you poorer. Because you can't get a house anymore, because they're 500 grand, they're 250 grand. 2 3-bedroom house, 250 grand. That is not aligned with anyone's decent salary. In the 1960s and 50s, when this post-war consensus was going, I'll make a full video about that, don't worry, you could buy a house quite easily with a year or two salary. Now, you can't do that. Unless you are at the top of your field, you are not buying a house within a few years, just on salary. You can do different stuff, you can get money from parents and grandparents, as I've said, but just on your own, you are not buying a house in the first few years you're working. Or the first few years you have a decent job. A few years' wages is not buying you a house. So what can we do? This is essentially my main point, what I'm getting at. What can we do? Because all that's going to happen is Conservative, Labour and Reform are going to keep wasting time. They're going to keep blaming other stuff that has no relevance whatsoever to why people are getting poorer. People are going to love it and eat it up because they love being angry. I'm not saying anyone's unintelligent or anything, by the way. It's just basic psychology. Everyone loves rallying behind something, and everyone loves being angry, stuff like that. You can see that in the German people in the 1930s, most of which weren't full-blooded Nazis or anything, but they joined in the persecution of Jews mainly because everyone else was doing it. Everyone was rallying behind it, and everyone kind of loved it. Not the persecution of the Jews, but they loved the nationality, the unionising of the country, which is most likely what reform's going to prey on. Much like Germany in that time, we are intensely nationalistic here. Britain is probably the most intensely nationalistic country besides America currently, and they're going to prey on that. They're going to use most people's love for the country to continue their message, to campaign their message and rally people behind them, and basically waste time. Labour's currently wasting time. Labour hasn't actually made any massive developments apart from raising the minimum wage, which doesn't keep up with inflation, by the way. They've raised it. Doesn't mean it keeps up with inflation, but that's by the way. They're just wasting time, as the Conservatives did. Brexit was the only massive thing that Conservatives did in the last decade. They've not made any decent improvements to social spending, social budgeting. They've raised taxes and cut social spending, and that's about it. Same with Labour before them, same with Conservatives before them. Apart from Brexit, there's not been a massive development in this country since Thatcher. And that's not a good thing. There's not been a positive massive development since the 60s. And what we're continuing to see is them biding their time. And we're running out of time for them to bide. You'll see the middle class in the 1950s, the working class, and the upper class. And what's happening is this is slowly eroding. The working class completely gone. They don't have any assets. They don't have houses, stuff like that. And it's slowly rising. And if we leave it a good few more years, it'll take the middle class as well. And then it's only the rich. It's only the 1%, or you starve and you be homeless. That's it. If we keep letting this going, no one will own a house. No one will be able to afford a mortgage. No one will have anything apart from 1%. If we continue like this. And we can't continue like this. We just can't. What we're going to see in the next 4.5 years, we are benefited massively. Bless their souls, what's going on in America right now. Because we can see what happens when an anti-immigrant far-right party gets in. And what's happening? Absolutely nothing. Prices are going up. Everything's going up. Does Donald Trump care? No. He does whatever he wants. Because he's a far-right politician who doesn't like immigrants. He's currently raiding schools and shops and stuff like that, raiding employees, trying to kick them out to bolster his numbers because he can't do their job properly. He can't properly get rid of the dangerous criminals, which he campaigned against. So he takes random innocent people and deports them. That is what we're going to see if we get reforming. That is all we're going to see. And we now have 4.5 years to change our mind. Because if we, for the 4.5 years, campaign with reform, all that will happen is the country will get poorer, the rich will get richer, and most people will be some form of persecuted. It doesn't matter if you're white, if you're brown, if you're black, where you're from, who you are. If you're not the 1%, you will lose. That is how it is. Now, this all sounds immensely depressing, mainly because it is, but what can we do in a positive way? What you can do is boost this movement. This movement is decently popular, but we need it forefront. We need it up there, especially in America, any of the American viewers. What you can do is support the New York mayoral race right now. What's currently happening in New York, for those that don't know, the current governor, who's massively rich, he supports the rich, is going against a man named Zohran Mamdani. I apologise for butchering that name. He is a fantastic campaigner. What he's currently doing is suggesting massive reforms to social reference. Just for reference, New York is intensely horrific to live in right now. The prices are huge for rent and food and stuff like that. He's proposing really good reforms for that. I highly recommend checking him out. I will probably put his channel down below in the description. I really suggest checking him out and trying to boost that movement. I think if we can get positive change, especially in a city like New York, in a county like New York, a state like New York, we can massively bolster the movement in general. The movement to tax rich people, to benefit the poorer people, and to kind of even things out. Not saying communism or anything, not saying collectivization, just try and lessen that gap between rich and poor people. Try and invest it in stuff like childcare, stuff like lowering house prices, making sure that the rich can't buy anything, everything, and anything, because time is running out. And what you'll see, if you look any time in history, we'll return to a poor and rich society. There won't be a middle class if we don't act quickly. Again, we've been blessed with hindsight, or we will be blessed with hindsight, over Donald Trump's current regime in America. We will be able to see that for what it is, see that most likely far-right politics will not work, and they will not help a country grow and develop and help its people. And ideally, that will change the minds of people. But there will be people whose minds will not be changed. And that's just how it is. People will still vote for Conservative, people will still vote for Labour, and people will vote for reform. As we're seeing in the local elections currently, there's a massive reform presence there. There's a massive support for reform because people want change. What we can do is boost the movement. You can see on Gary Stevenson, on Gary's Economics, he's doing press rallies, he's doing massive support for the poor people. He's campaigning. I obviously can't campaign, I'm not big enough for that. But supporting him and the movement, and especially Green Party's proposing, all I know, Green Party is proposing taxing the rich. And that's the main thing I'm interested in. Honestly, if Reform suggests taxing the rich, be all aboard on that. They most likely won't. But what's important, you put aside what political party you believe in. You put aside left and right, it doesn't matter. You need to believe in left economics, not left policy. Left policy is what Labour like doing, is socialist stuff. That's not what you need to care about. You need to care about taxing the rich and taxing their assets. Otherwise, there won't be any parties to vote for. That's just how it is. If you can't have any money at all, and the government has no money at all, then how is there supposed to be parties? How is there supposed to be different policy? They can't give you a policy if they can't act on it because they're all poor and broke and they can't actually spend any of the money. So what we need to do now, we have 4.5 years essentially to change most of the public's mind. Not even most, just a good majority, but reform is not the way to go. And again, things have fallen incredibly in place. We get to see what's happening in America. We might get to see what's happening in Germany. As I've not mentioned this previously, but especially in Western countries, Eastern European countries, stuff like that. Not Eastern European, just European, but we're seeing these well-formed societies get massive support for far-right parties against immigration. I don't know the immigration situation in Germany right now. I don't know the immigration situation in most of these developed countries, but I do know that doing that will not solve the problem. And all these far-right organisations are trying to do is consolidate their power, make sure it's a global thing, so then no one can do anything about it. I really hope this gets out to a few people at least. Honestly, 3 views, I'll be completely happy, because I've absolutely waffled. But the main takeaways from this video is we need to do something. Reform is not the way to go. And you just need to focus on the main policy. You don't need to focus on opinions. You don't need to focus on what's good or bad. You need to focus on, is X party taxing the rich? If not, then it's not worth it. Because all that will happen is we'll go around in circles. We'll get little benefits here, little benefits there, and it will just get worse and worse and worse. Because we'll go from Reform to Conservative to Labour, Reform, Conservative, Labour. It will just keep looping until they've got us where they want us. And that gap that I mentioned earlier is really closing. It really is. There's not much wiggle room anymore. We have a good, I'd say, decade. We have a decent decade until everything's gone to shit, essentially. We have a very short amount of time. So what I recommend you do, if anyone's asking, okay, fair enough, what can I do? Do your own thing. That's the main thing I have. Make art, write books, do anything. Just make sure especially word of mouth. Word of mouth is so massively important. Post on social media, stuff like that. Just make sure that this message is out there. Do what you can. Because the only thing that you can do, the only thing I'd like you to do, the only thing I'd beg you to do is make sure people know. Because if people have an alternative to reform, they will look into it. People don't like the idea of persecute. When you look at most people who believe in reform, they don't believe in, they don't want to persecute people. They don't want to harm people's lives. They don't want to tear apart families. They just need change. And everyone needs change. That is fair enough, because reform has presented themselves as change. What we need to do is present a much better option for change, a much peacefuler option for change, which doesn't involve kicking good, decent people who have lived there all their lives out of this country. That's what we need to do. And then people will start to vote. And word of mouth will spread, and it will massively, massively help. We've seen this in New York, as I've mentioned. Zoran Mandani wasn't a massive person in politics until very recently, and he's had a massive boom because people have seen this is the real issue. It is not migrants. It's not various other issues. It's not wall. It's the rich. It really is, and it's a lack of social spending. It's a lack of helping everyone get up when they have a tough time, when they lose their job and stuff like that. The lack of resources there is the cause. That's the main thing I'd like you to take away from this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you've watched to the end of this, I've waffled completely. If you'd be interested in seeing more, make sure to like and subscribe and all that. Let me know any suggestions in the comments if you have any. And I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. And next week, I believe we'll have another interview. But fingers crossed, I'll put a community post or something like that if plans change. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching.